continued budget meeting to order. June the 3rd already, 2022. And I'll ask Madam Clerk, is there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, we're going to add 2A for closed session under GS 143-318-11A. 1 and 6 is for privileged and confidential information and personnel. And 2B will be public comment. Becky Garland would like to make a comment prior to being the finance officer. And then the rest is okay.
Okay. Can I hear a motion, please, to go into closed session?
Second.
All in favor, please? And I will ask that we have finance officer.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Believe it or not, I would way rather be there with all of you in person, but out of an abundance of caution, I think it's better that I have been able to kind of stay away for a few days just to make sure I feel okay. Really no symptoms other than some congestion, but I've been able to get a lot done, believe it or not, and I've pretty much worked more, in my opinion, than while I've been home, because it's one of those things where you make yourself leave the office and then you can't go back to it. Whereas if you're home, if you get up and take a break, it's still right there. So I've been able to get some things done, and I commend Ms. Becky and Ms. Kemp for what they're able to always do on a daily basis. So thank you to them. We'll get started on what we've been kind of talking and going through. I know there's some questions that still need to be resolved. We still have another budget workshop date scheduled for next Friday if we need to use that. And unless there's any questions with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Becky with any presentation she has further going forward.
Okay, and I just want to make a comment, not as finance officer, but just as a citizen of the state of North Carolina, which this comment is going to make sense when we start talking about our budget. The first thing I wanted to say was how much I appreciated the analysis and the explanation that Lester Green, the CFO of the school system, provided last Friday as to why they had made the change in their budget request, which points out a major flaw that we've got going on with our state government. The second thing, before I get into that, I want to commend this board because this board probably has the hardest job of making a budget in all 100 counties. And we all know the reasons for that. We don't need to go into all that. I could go for days and days. But as I was working on the budget till about 8 o'clock last night, and basically worked on it through the night as I would wake up, it hit me, I hadn't looked at how the state budget was going. And so I just Googled around this morning while I was eating my breakfast, and I found out that they're going in to their budget, and I'm not calling out just the General Assembly, I'm calling out the governor's office too, with a $6.7 billion surplus. And honestly, it flew all over me because, as Lester pointed out, a lot of their budget change has flowed through unfunded mandates, which trickles to the county. And I've always said that the school system and the county government, no matter what county you're in, is one big happy, sometimes functional, sometimes dysfunctional family. What happens to the school system affects the county. What happens to the county ultimately affects our citizens. And in the article I read this morning where they were bragging about their $6.7 billion surplus, they were talking about how they were going to cut taxes. Well, here's the rub on that. They cut taxes a few years ago, and it cost most of the people more taxes because when they cut the tax rate, they decreased the deductions. And I remember that year, just for me as an example, that tax cut cost me $2,500. That was some kind of tax cut. When they make changes like unfunded mandates to add to their surplus, and then they change tax rates, ultimately it's our low and moderate income people who are disproportionately impacted, because what happens most of the time is that the boards of commissioners in this state wind up having to change their tax rate to fund these unfunded mandates. And property tax is the most regressive tax you will ever have, because we all know this, it disproportionately impacts our elderly folks on fixed incomes, our low and moderate income people who are now trying to figure out how to buy their groceries and their gas. So I would urge, and I'm going to do it myself, not as a CFO, but as a citizen of this state, I would urge every citizen to reach out to their state representatives and say, no more unfunded mandates.
We do it all the time.
And we do it through
And you do it, The
NCACC.
more input they get, maybe the more impact, I know.
Because the other piece that Lester pointed out was not only do they, I was grateful after I left that meeting that I'm not a school finance officer. I don't know how to juggle all those different pots to make it work, because again, not only are they pushing down unfunded mandates, but they're failing to fully fund these schools with their allotments. And all that stuff started 10 years ago with the Great Recession, and they've never restored any of those, or a lot of those cuts.
Have never been dispersed as property.
Exactly. So that's my comment going into that. I will put my CFO hat back on. But I am not a happy girl this morning, because if the state's got that level of surplus, I get that they have to have rainy day funds. I understand fund balance. I understand all of those things. But there comes a point in time when they need to start. If counties, we're a Dillon's rural state, which means we're an arm of the state government. If they're going to say we're an arm of the state government, then doggone it, they need to start treating us like part of them and providing the funding that we need to make it.
As a partner.
As a partner.
Yes.
As a partner. So I'll be quiet. That was my soapbox for the moment. And I do thank the board for all the hard work that you do and all the consideration you make.
And I'd like to add to that, just so the board knows, and I think Commissioner Nelms asked me earlier, I have been in communication with Angie, and we are currently trying to set up some potential dates to meet with our state representatives all together to discuss the very things that, which I agree with Ms. Becky and Ms. Garland there, that are pretty ridiculous that come down from the state. So just be aware that we will be throwing some dates out soon to hopefully be able to get the school and whoever wants to be involved in the school, their board, you as a board, and then both our state representatives. So I'll be working on trying to lock down some dates going forward.
And I want to say I'm very thankful that we have representatives like Kevin Corbin and Carl West, because they do listen. It's and I'm not calling them out per se. I'm calling out all the rest who don't listen. So anyway, what I want to do is just give you some perspective and some thought process. As you know, 2 weeks ago, I walked in here with a $2.4 million deficit. I made changes recommended and through directives with the board. I made changes. I took salaries and wages back to baseline, which is what we're paying today. There was discussion about inequities in our pay plan and how we're paying folks, and I made those suggested changes. And then I also spent a considerable amount of time on the departments that are state and federally funded, looking at those budgets. Sometimes those budgets get put together based on what, and this is, I'd say every county does this, based on what the state projects their reimbursements are going to be for specific programs. And so I've looked at those departments. I'm still working on those. Those are our larger departments. But one thing to bear in mind, I think last week I came in with a 1.1 million, or a little more than that, I think 1.15 million deficit. Looking at those federal and state reimbursed budgets, if you pull the expenditure side down, the revenue follows, okay? So I was only able to achieve, I think, about $150,000 decrease in the deficit. But my goal is for our budget, and it's always been my goal, two things: that we're zero-based. We always look at each year on its own. And number two, that we're not over-budgeting. Because when we over-budget our expenditures, then we're pulling too much on the taxpayers. So I spent most of the night, as I would wake up in the middle of the night, pondering, trying to figure out what some things we can do at this point to alleviate the $1,044,000 deficit. Now, the first thing I say with fear and trembling, because I know that we need to make certain that the schools are budgeted to make their way. And I want to make certain that we honor what they honored, and that they honored our request 8 years ago to spend down their fund balance, and they honored that. So it's up to us, because they are an arm of us indirectly, to help them in their situation. So I'm not sure if you recall, but in Lester's analysis, he looked at our baseline, what we've been given the last several years at $1 million, and then he looked at it growing the budget over time. What would it look like today? And I chose the highest at 7.5% increase each year. And so that increase is like $268,000 to meet just their current needs. My suggestion would be to fund them at that 268 with the understanding and the commitment that we would continue to increase over time, that we would not leave that $1 million stagnant or that $1.2 million stagnant, but that we would follow the model that Lester set forth with a 7.5% increase per year. And that increase next year would be about $95,000. I don't want to cause the school system to be in any sort of a bind and not be able to increase their fund balance. It's a real balancing act, as you all know, for them. And once again, most of that increase they requested is unfunded mandates. So I could very well understand where Lester and Angie were coming from. So part of that would be to fund them partially, part of the $500,000, and then continue to increase over time. The other piece is I had put $100,000 for major repairs on our buildings. We put that in the last several years. I've decreased that by $80,000 with the idea that if our revenue streams are healthier than what we project them to be, then we would add those cuts back. I left enough in to buy 2 or 3 heat pumps, but I think we've got staff on board now who can do the required maintenance on the heat pumps to extend their lives. So I'm hoping that that'll cover it. The fourth item down is, putting a hold on capital outlay until, and reevaluate it at mid-year if revenue streams again are healthy or healthier than we project, then we could add those back on a case-by-case basis. One of that includes a cut to the IT budget for servers. And that may be a have-to that we would have to go out and do a lease on. But I want to be fair to every department. If I'm cutting one department, I'm going to cut them all. And then the balance would be $422,000 roughly in where I would look at each department again, scrub through the departments again, looking for any evidence of over budgeting based on past history and current history, but also scrubbing it line by line so that I'm not trimming areas like fuel, not just doing a massive cut, but looking at it critically so that the cost of fuel and the cost of inflation is not taken away. So, and then in conjunction with that, when you were in closed session, I was back in my office double checking all the revenue that I projected to see if I've left any holes or I've under budgeted revenue. So I'm looking for over budgeted expenditures and under budgeted revenue. That's the only thing I know to do to make sure that we have a fair budget that truly represents what it's costing around this county without overburdening our taxpayers. The last thing I want to do is cause people to pay more if we don't have to. And so that's where I'm coming from with trying to do this trimming work. Of course, we have other options, and at the bottom of this analysis I put other options that have been put on the table in the past, and one of those is creating a public safety fee that would be like the sanitation fee that boards, I guess 20 years ago, put in place to help with the changeover from landfill to transfer station. A tax increase, looking at fees again in every department and doing across-the-board fee increases. And then one thing that's always been a sticking point in every budget that I've worked on is looking at how we do sanitation. I think 3 years ago, the board directed that we put, I guess it's 4 now, a sanitation committee together. We did all the studies of different models. We brought it, but ultimately I think the pandemic killed any changes because we had to be very frugal in our budgeting. And so, that's not something that the board can do overnight or even within a week or a month. But over time, I think if we look critically at how we do sanitation, and Manager Marino and I've had a lot of discussion about that, there can be cost savings overall.
Did that committee discuss or look into private management? I know it's been a few years ago and I can't remember how much, but I think we had a private company offer to buy out and just run the whole sanitation. Was that explored?
I believe it was. I'll have to go back and look at all my notes. I think 3 or 4 models were presented, keep everything the same, privatize, manning and gating of dump sites, and then we took a real hard look and actually made a field trip to Swain County to look at their model where it's all centralized in one location. They have compactors and they have people manning the area, but it's way more controlled. So you don't have all of the diving and the negative impacts of dump sites. Yeah. And I was thinking about it yesterday, and I'm gonna have to go find all my notes from that committee, because we did a lot of number crunch. It needs to be tweaked, obviously, now. It's been 4 years, 3 or 4 years. But that's something I think that Manager Marino and our director and myself, if they want me to look at, a real hard look at.
Yes, and to add, I have already communicated with Director Colbert out there regarding the vision going forward. We're communicating with MESCO about a master plan for the sanitation department as a whole out there to include the white goods, metals, and recyclables, and a building to replace the badly deteriorated shed that's out there. So we do have some vision going forward. But to add to that, I told him to be working on updating the numbers that they came in with last year. At least like Ms. Garland said 3 or 4 years ago, with the 3-man sites, what it would cost to have those now, and closing down sites and being able to centralize sanitation to those sites and be able to get potentially more revenue with recyclables, although there's not a lot in that. But there is with cardboard. There is some revenue in cardboard, which we've already started moving towards getting a little bit more revenue. So we will work towards updating those numbers.
Any comments or questions from the board?
So I guess the feedback I would need, especially the one item would be that school request. If what the board's feeling is on that, how if I'm even in the ballpark on what the board would want us to take back to the schools. Because I feel like that needs to be a level discussion with Manager Marino, myself, Lester, and Ms. Angie.
I think your recommendation would satisfy the need they have right now and would also allow for adjustments going forward. Is that am I getting that correct? So I am glad to see that. We're not looking at the total $500,000 all up front on July the 1st, but working to it and through it.
Correct.
Okay.
And then the rest is basically, if the board's okay with me just continuing to work through tweaking, and then this time next week I'll have you a full budget laid out to look at. And I'm sorry that this budget's been real different than others in that I've never had a deficit this large to try to trim down, and I wish I could just lay it out today and say this is what we need to do, but there's just so many moving parts that could adversely affect our citizens, but also could hurt different systems too. You know, we don't want to hurt the services we provide by hamstringing the departments too much. And we don't want to hurt the schools either. So this is why I had to take this track on presenting the information to the board in large chunks instead of each department at this point.
Understood. Thank you for the work that you've done on this. It's I'm sure it's nerve-wracking.
Well, I think that my colleagues in the office and my family have borne the brunt of me being kind of grouchy, and I'm trying not to be grouchy, but I've been kind of grouchy about it.
It makes you grouchy when you're having money that's not there.
And I appreciate the board's patience. And that's basically all I've got for right now. if the board's okay with what I've presented to this point.
Board? Good to go? That looks like the right path forward to me, thank you. Dale?
What options are there?
It's a very difficult budget time, very difficult, for everybody, I'm sure. All right, y'all good? Path forward? Check.
Thank you.
You know, with a $6.5 billion surplus and the North Carolina lottery for education, our school systems should not lack for anything. Only 24% of the lottery money goes to the schools.
My sister's an educator and she's a school board member, and when the lottery came up, she was against it. And I was like, why? And she said, because it'll get co-opted, the schools will not see, and she's like, it's not going to help the schools. And I appreciate that the state is going to give another pay increase to our teachers, because, you know, at the end of the day, our teachers are what is kind of like the foundation of a good society. But if they're going to do that, then like Lester said, they need to say all school staff, teachers, faculty, and staff get these pay raises out of the state budget.
And yes, and pay for them. The last numbers that I had, it's been a couple of years, about 17% of the lottery money was actually going to the schools.
Yeah.
Which wasn't what was on the ballot when the citizens voted to put the lottery in place, not at all.
Yes.
In the original bill, there was language that prevented the legislature from substituting lottery proceeds for what the legislature would normally fund. And before the bill was voted on, they took that language out. And so now what they have done is they have substituted, and the administration of the lottery gets $74 to $75 million a year just to manage it.
Mm-hmm.
And we sit here struggling
Get
to make a budget for a mandate from the legislature.
But if they would fully allocate that money the way they said they would, there would be no school system in this state hurting for money.
And quit giving tax dollars to private schools when public schools can't buy books for the kids, and you're giving our tax money to private schools that we couldn't send our kids to if we wanted to. That's I'm going to shut up. I'm getting irritated.
It's accurate information, and we certainly need to be aware of it and keep it in mind when we're talking to our legislature. So thank you, Dale.
Unbelievable.
Is there anything further? If not, then I'll ask for a motion to continue the meeting to...
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I'm sorry, Madam Chair. One quick thing. I think Ms. Kim, Clerk Chris has provided some letters of potential support. A little information behind that. Graham Fields, who represents Advent Health, approached me via email about discussing a meeting with me about the potential of building another hospital under CON in Western North Carolina. I was graciously accepted a phone call and arranged a meeting. I arranged a phone call with myself and Brian Stevens, obviously with our emergency management and emergency medical services director, and arranged a meeting for him to come out and met with Brian this week. Obviously, I couldn't attend for various reasons you may well already be aware of. And basically, what they're doing is applying through the state, give the chief healthcare planning certificate for a certificate of need to build a 67 acute care bed, and what they indicated in the letter is Buncombe, Madison, Yancey, and the Graham County service area, which Graham County is a little bit outside of the Buncombe County, Madison, and Yancey service area, but we potentially, and we don't normally transport obviously in that way. My assumption would be Graham County would probably fall out of the running just because of various reasons out here with the need and the lack of the facilities and infrastructure and several other reasons. But potentially we could use their services maybe, occasionally down the road. In any event, I felt it was worth listening to and being open to the fact that maybe that's another opportunity to help with patient care in our area.
Certainly.
So the question was, there's a letter there, and we can redo the letter if the board's interested in providing. I recommend providing a letter of support to provide anything that might be able to be worth helping our, anybody out in western North Carolina area. And you have that letter now. It can be either some county managers sign, some the chairman of the board, but I'll leave that up to the discretion of the board and what they would be interested in doing.
Thank you, Jason. I haven't read the letter, but I will, and I support any kind of facility that will help serve our citizens, not only in this county, but certainly in surrounding counties. And we know that we've had some challenges with Mission over the last several months, and any acute care facilities are very needed because quite often those are the beds that we can't find for patients, and certainly that was the case during the height of COVID.
Absolutely. And then a lot of this is based on the fact that when Mission sold out and went from a nonprofit and sold out to HCA in 2019 for a for-profit, a lot of the residents have been vocal about their desire for improved access to patient choice. So I think the need is certainly there, and it would give some more options. And again, I recommend providing a letter of support in some form or fashion.
Thank you, Jason. Any comments from the board or questions?
Just looking at it, I'd say it'll be, if we're lucky, why it'd be Buncombe County. Those other counties above there.
Oh, yeah.
Very true.
Maybe they don't have a hospital in other regions listed as three. I don't know.
That may be something we want to add into the letter. Just request that the location be more feasible for Graham County and it will Buncombe.
And I'll put the letterhead on it as well.
Is there anything further? Thanks, everybody, and I'll entertain a motion to continue the meeting until next Friday at 9 o'clock.
Motion.
Is there a second? All in favor?